Okay, I think we'll make a start now. Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to join us. This afternoon we're going to be talking about the new MSc that we're running from this September in flood risk management. So before we begin, I'm just going to introduce everybody that's going to be involved in the webinar. I'll be talking through most of it, and the rest of us will be here for the Q&A sessions, and Dan's going to give us an introduction. But I'll just let everybody introduce themselves. So I'm Stuart McClelland. I'm Deputy Director of the Energy and Environment Institute. Anne?
Hi, I'm Anne Baar. I'm a researcher at the Energy and Environment Institute. I study sediment transport in estuaries and rivers. And for example, I use numerical models to predict how estuaries change under the changing boundary conditions. For example, increasing river discharge and sea level rise.
Okay, Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Coulthard. I'm a Prof of Physical Geography. I'll be answering questions as the webinar goes on. So if you have any questions, type them in the questions box, and I'll try and answer them as I go along, and we might try and answer some at the end. For the masters, I work with modelling river systems and estuaries and coastal systems. I work with numerical modellings, predicting how flooding and environmental change affects the water systems around where we live.
Thanks. Josh?
Hi, I'm Josh Wolstenholme, and I'm doing my PhD in the Institute, and I look at natural flood management and how it influences geomorphology and what that might mean for the efficacy of the flood management method in the future, so using both fieldwork and numerical models.
Okay, and I'll let Dan introduce himself, and he's going to say a few words about what we're doing and the course in general as well.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart, and thanks everybody for tuning in. My name's Daniel Parsons. I'm the director of the Energy and Environment Institute at the University of Hull, and this is a really exciting new course that we've developed as a team over the very recent past. But it builds on a long-standing set of research interests and teaching that we've done over a long period of time. Hull and the Humber is one of the places most are flood hazard and risk in across the UK, and naturally we've been studying these things for a long period of time given that, and indeed some of the work that's been done at the university fed directly into, for example, the pit review of floods around 10 years ago, which has really set flood policy in the UK for the past 10 to 15 years. So what we're looking to do here is build on that legacy of research, build on that teaching excellence that we have, and put on a course that has industry relevance to it as well. Now, Stuart will talk you through a set of slides now that give all of that contextual background. So I'll pass back to him at this stage. But thanks for tuning in, and I hope that you have an interesting next half hour, 45 minutes, learning about the course and what's on offer. Stuart.
Thanks very much, Dan. That's great. Okay, so I'm going to take you through what's involved in the flood risk management. This is really the launch of this new program. So our first opportunity to tell everybody about what we're planning to do and explain a little bit about what the program involves. Here's an outline of what we're going to be seeing over the next half hour or so. I'm going to start with a video which will give you some sound bites from students and also from potential employers for people that might do this course. We've got some employers talking about the value of flood risk management and why it's so important. I'll say a little bit more about that afterwards and try and explain why we put this program on so that you understand the context, and again introduce some of the ideas about what sort of jobs you could go on after the program. Then another short video looking at why come and study here at Hull and why this region is so important for looking at flood risk management. Then I'll get into the nuts and bolts of the program and explain actually what it is that we're going to be teaching through the year. And finally, I'll say a few words about how we've tried to make the course flexible and inclusive. We've designed this course from the ground up and tried to make it sort of accessible to everybody and make it flexible in terms of how people can study and participate in what we're doing. and I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. And then we'll finish with a summary of everything that's been said and a question and answer session where you can ask us anything you like, and we'll try and answer as best we're able to. But I would encourage you, as Tom said, to use the question section. You should find it on the toolbar over on the right-hand side. So any questions you have throughout, pop them up into the questions scheme. Tom will either answer it during the presentation or we'll pick up on it at the end. So first of all, we're going to show a short video clip which says something about what employers think about flood risk management and why it's important, and why a master's program like this is sort of needed at this point in time, and also show you some students that are currently at the University of Hull and let them tell you something about what the experience is like. Just bear in mind that the way the software works, your video window may appear behind the main window. So if you don't see the video immediately in the first instance, just have a look behind and cycle through your windows. So it should just be loading up for you now, and I'll start to play.
Here in Hull, there's a lot of research on natural systems and challenges such as climate change and flood risk, and I'm excited to contribute to these studies. But the benefits of studying in Hull is definitely that there are a lot of applied and fundamental projects related to issues such as flood risk and climate change, and this results in a lot of knowledge from different perspectives.
I get involved in flood risk projects and environmental projects all over the world. But it's great to talk a little bit about the MSc in flood risk management at Hull. Hull is just one of the best places that you could come to study about flood risk management. All different aspects of flood risk that you could encounter around the world are here in Hull.
Flooding is the most recorded natural disaster on this planet. In the last 2 decades alone, 2 billion people, a third of the population of this globe, has been impacted in one way or another by a large-scale flood event. The opportunities in this sphere of the world right now are endless. It's the place to be, and it's the place to be for me, because you can impact the lives of generations now and in the future.
I think it's really important to study natural flood management because it's something that's only going to get worse in the future. So it's important that we learn to be able to live with flooding and sort of manage floods, but also be able to mitigate, to be able to reduce the negative impacts like loss of life and destruction of infrastructure.
I was a partner in the development of the world-leading city water resilience approach with the Rockefeller Foundation, the Resilience Shift, World Bank and Arab, and Hull is a global pilot city for that initiative.
At Hull we have a whole host of experience from both academic and industry partners, as well as access to high-resolution survey-grade equipment such as drones, the terrestrial laser scanner, as well as the total environment simulator.
Being within the Energy and Environment Institute has also been really great, being constantly surrounded by so many postgraduate researchers and lecturers with such a broad knowledge base and a wide variety of fields. I look forward to completing my PhD and to having a career within the research industry and helping towards a more sustainable future.
Every place experiences flood risk in different ways, so flood risk management opportunities across the UK vary from place to place. That being said, there are common areas of opportunity within risk management authorities and across the wider sector.
As a company, Arab, we recruit a large number of graduates each year, and we're always looking for good people who know their subject, who are good team workers, but also people who are able to understand the community, politicians, stakeholders, and to translate those aspirations into technical solutions.
Presentation there. That was hopefully a really informative video for everybody, showing you something about what some of the potential employers from think about the importance of flood risk management and why we need a program like this, but also some information from students about what it's like to be a student at the University of Hull and what it's like to study at the University of Hull. So I'm just going to give you an overview of our thinking behind this program and why it is so important. If we're looking at future flood risk, the UK is going to need to take a different approach to how to manage our flood risk and how to deal with flood risk. We're going to have to build flood strategies that use an holistic approach to catchment management. We can't just think about single places in isolation. We've got to look at how water moves through a catchment and why flood events occur and how we can control and manage them potentially. So some of the questions that come from that are, should we try and build natural flood defences upstream? There's a lot of interest in natural flood management. There's a lot of natural flood management being implemented all over the country and all over the world at the moment, using things like leaky dams, which the second picture from the left shows here. And the idea of those is all to sort of slow flow down and make it take longer for water in the upstream part of the catchment to get down to the downstream part. And that can potentially have an effect on reducing flood impacts. But does it work? How many leaky dams would we need? There's lots of questions still to be answered about how these approaches work, and that's one of the things the programme will look at. Similarly, we can think about how we actually stop floodwater affecting houses and things. You can see a great example here from Shropshire of a river, the River Severn in flood, and a demountable flood barrier that can be put in place when a flood event is going to occur, protecting houses on the riverbank. Can we keep erecting flood barriers like this? Well, some people would say we can't, and that there's a limit to how many flood barriers that we can construct to keep the flood waters out. And if we can't do that, and if natural flood defences can't provide the complete solution, we're still left with the problem that flood events will occur. And that's really the reality that we face and the challenge that's faced, that we have to actually live with water. So just as floods happened in the 50s, so the picture on the right-hand side there shows a flood event in Hull. That happened in the 50s. Flood events are still going to happen now and in the future. Regardless of what approaches we take to try and stop them, there'll always be large events. And we need to think about how society and communities can build some resilience to those flood events so that the impact is not as great and that the loss suffered is not as great. And that's what this course is all about, looking at how we can approach that in the future. You know, and some of the raw statistics show us why studying flood risk management is really important. The Environment Agency is already expecting sea levels to rise by 1/3 of a metre by 2060. There's some predictions saying sea level rise could be as great as a metre by 2100. So there's a pressure in terms of sea level rise, both in terms of that increasing river flooding in low level areas, but also in terms of flooding from surge tides, etc. In 2015-16, the cost of flooding was estimated at 1.6 billion. So it's a huge cost to the nation's economy, and the more that we can do to manage that risk, the better. And the reality is that that cost is associated with over 5 million homes being at risk of flooding. And of those 5 million people, less than 10% understand or realise that they are at risk. And that's all about communicating these ideas of flood risk and helping people to build some resilience to flood events when they happen. A lot of people don't realise what their flood risk is, and we need to be able to engage communities much better so that they can understand and respond to events when they happen. And the Environment Agency has identified that the UK really needs to develop new approaches to managing flood risk. And that's, again, what we're trying to do with this course. We're trying to equip people with the skills and the background knowledge to look at new and innovative approaches to how we can resolve flood risk, whether that's through leaky dams or other natural flood management measures, or trying to slow the flow so that we reduce the impact of big rainfall events. And all of these things will contribute to what the Environment Agency is looking for, which is to make the UK a centre for world-leading flood organisations. And why do this in Hull? Well, if anybody knows Hull, you would know that actually it's at risk of flooding from a whole range of sources. So we're right on the estuary, and we're at risk from sea level rise, and particularly surge flood events. We're also at risk from groundwater flooding. We're at risk from sewers flooding. We're at risk from surface water flooding. and we're at risk from river flooding. So Hull is where all those different sorts of flood risks come together, and Hull has to manage, understand, and deal with those different flood risks. So Hull's a really good place to look at this, and sort of good focus for where the study should be. And that's also borne out by being the Humber region, outside London, being the place that's at greatest risk from flooding. So the greatest impact on the economy from flooding could happen within the Humber region. And that's led to the development of the Living with Water initiative, which is a local initiative between Hull and the East Riding of Yorkshire and other organisations to basically cope with and try and look at how we can deal with flood risk in different ways to manage how communities deal with it and build greater resilience. And that idea of building greater resilience, again, this came up in the video that I showed a moment or two ago, is that Hull is actually one of 5 cities in the world that was selected by the Rockefeller Foundation and Arup as an exemplar of how to build a water resilience framework. So the flood issues that we face in Hull basically identify the city as being a place where we need to look at how we can build resilience and how we can reduce that flood risk. And that's why the city was selected as an exemplar for this by these 2 organisations. So these are all good reasons why it's good to come and study this in Hull, and why it's a key location. And just before I show the next video, I think it's worth picking out a quote that comes from the draft Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy, which the Environment Agency produced, which says that what we're trying to do is, what we need to do for the future is build a nation of climate champions who are able to adapt to flooding and coastal change through innovation. And again, I come back to that's what this master's course is really all about. We're trying to equip the graduates from this course with the skills to innovate and adapt to flooding, but also to spread that through communities. So to have an impact beyond their own studies and to really sort of change the face of how we deal with flooding. So I'm going to move on to the next video. So again, just watch out. This may appear behind your window, and you might just need to flick through if you want to see it. Okay, it'll just start in a moment, and this talks about why Hull University is a good place to study and the importance of flood management in the Humber region.
I'm Daniel Parsons. I'm a professor up at the university, and I'm the director of the Energy and Environment Institute at the university, which seeks to bring together multiple disciplines into one collaborative arena where we can really seek solutions that we in Hull and the Humber really can drive and lead on internationally as we move forward into what's been called a zero carbon world. So in the Humber estuary, along the east coastal margin, big changes are happening because of storminess, increase in storminess, and also sea level rise. We need to address this. We need to begin to tackle some of these solutions around pollutants of carbon into the atmosphere, but we also need to think about the way in which we mitigate and adapt the effects that are already going to happen in terms of the climate of Earth. the Living with Water partnership, which we're very proud at the university to now be contributing and working towards. That is all about adaptation, mitigation, living with water. We will flood again, but how do we become more resilient? How do we ensure that our recovery is really rapid, and how do we ensure that we're prepared as a society for this into the future? The Humber is really much at the forefront, on the front line of climate change in a whole host of ways. And when we look at the capacity of wind energy globally, it's exponential. That the speed of growth is unbelievable, and that's because the costs have been driven down so quickly. Wind could supply enough energy to sustain the whole of humanity 40 times over. The university and all of the partnerships through Greenport Growth and now the Aura collaborative cluster really coming together, shaping the future of this massive industry, the offshore wind sector. And we're embedded as a region within the UK government's sector deal for offshore wind. We're leading nationally and internationally on this. People are looking at us, at what we're doing in terms of capitalising on the opportunity of offshore wind. The renewable revolution that's happening right here can help address all of these challenges associated with the climate crisis.
Okay, hopefully that video gave you a flavour of the opportunities that we have at Hull and what it's like to be a student at the University of Hull, and why flood risk management is so important to this region. Just before I talk about what the course content includes, I'd just like to introduce you to the teaching team involved in delivering the programme. We've designed this programme from the ground up to try and meet the need of what the stakeholders, people like the Environment Agency, local authorities have asked us to include in this sort of programme looking directly at flood risk management. So as myself, I'll be involved as the programme leader. You've already met Tom Coulthard, who specialised in environmental modelling and was chair of the independent review into Hull floods. Also involved is Rob Thomas, who's a senior research fellow in the EEI, specialising in geomorphology and flood risk. Chris Skinner, who's a research fellow, in particular looking at computer modelling of flooding and geomorphology. And Dan, who you met at the beginning, who's director of the Energy and Environment Institute. So we're all involved in delivering the teaching programme, and this is what it will look like if you're studying full-time. I'll talk a little bit towards the end about what the part-time setup will look like, which is a little bit different. You cover the same content, but obviously it will be delivered in a slightly different way from one year to the next. But for full-time students, in the first and second trimesters, you'll study 3 modules in each trimester. Each module is worth 20 credits. And then in the third trimester, you'll do your dissertation project, which is worth 60 credits. So in the first trimester, you look at a module called Water in the Environment, then Flood Impacts, Living with Water, then Flood Resilience, Living with Water. So I'll talk about each of these 3 modules in a minute. And then in the second trimester, you go on to looking at modelling flood events, followed by flood adaptation and mitigation, and finally a module on how we actually manage flood incidents. And then, as I say, it's the dissertation project in the third trimester. Trimesters basically, they're just saying that we split the year up into 4-month blocks when you do the studying for each of these sets of modules. So looking at the first module, Water in the Environment, this is basically an introduction to flooding, because one of the important things about this whole programme is that we want to enable students from all sorts of disciplines to come in and study flood risk management. So a key part of this first module is to really bring everybody up to speed with the processes that govern how water moves through the landscape, to understand the hydrology and the hydraulic processes that govern how water moves. And that's important for understanding the flow paths that water follows if we're going to try and manage flood risk. And you'll learn about practical skills for hydrological measurement and hydraulic measurement. So that's sort of the basic foundation for why floods happen. Why does water get out of place, you might say. Then we'll, in the second module, look at the impacts of flooding. So how do we actually live with flood waters? And that's important to think about flood hazards from all the different sources that we may have. I've already mentioned this in terms of the risks that Hull faces, but flood hazards can come from rivers, they can come from coasts, they can come from groundwater, they can come from sewers and from rainfall itself. So there's lots of different sources of flood hazard, and each one of them presents a different challenge. But also those challenges are going to change over time. We know that we're locked into certain amounts of climate change, which are going to mean increases in sea level, they're going to mean increases in storminess, they're going to mean increases in the frequency of large rainfall events, and possibly also rainfall events when we're not expecting them, so heavy rainfall during summer seasons. All of these contribute to changing flood risks over time, and we need to be ready to adapt to those changing flood risks. So an important part of this module is also thinking about how we deal with that and how people live and can live with these flood risks through sustainable drainage schemes, so how we actually deal with water in built up and developed environments. The third module comes back to this idea of what we've already mentioned of living with water. How do we build flood resilience in the community? And this module is really, really important. It's one of the fundamental building blocks of what the whole program's about, because fundamentally, floods can't be prevented. In the future, we need to learn how we can live with these risks. There's just economic and practical limitations, which mean that we can't keep building more walls and we can't keep building higher walls just to keep back floodwaters. So we're going to have to learn how to adapt and live with some elements of that flood risk. And that might be particularly on a community level, where people have to learn to sort of respond to and live with the risks in their area. And we have to look at that and understand how to best help communities to adapt to these future flood risks. In the second semester, one of the key modules is looking at modelling of flood events. And here we'll be using numerical models in order to understand the extent and magnitude of flood events and predict what areas might be flooded and what the flood risk is potentially for different areas. And these numerical modelling tools are essential tools for anyone trying to manage flood risk. But it's key to sort of emphasise to everybody that the important part of how we'll teach this module is to help and enable students to understand and use numerical models. We're not going to tell you how to make a numerical model, but how to use and apply it so that you can interpret the results from it, so that if you're in a position where you were looking at a report that included modelling, you could understand how that had come about and be able to understand maybe the weaknesses or strengths of that modelling approach. So we understand that not everybody would have a numerical background, but we're looking to teach these as tools that people can use practically. Obviously, in order to try and ameliorate flood risks, that there are many routes to adapting and mitigating floods. And in this module, we'll look at those different approaches of actually how we go about managing flood risk. At one end, that is the concrete walls, but also, as I've already mentioned, there are various natural flood management techniques that we can adopt. The picture on the right sort of shows some of those, where we try to, within a catchment as a whole, if we're considering a whole catchment, we try and slow down the movement of water by making places where we can store water or reduce the speed at which water flows over land. And all of those things can contribute to reducing flood risk. And we'll have in this module and in many of the other modules, we will have particular field excursions to go and look at examples of where these flood adaptation and mitigation schemes have been implemented, and we'll have experts, the people involved in actually constructing these schemes, coming along and explaining to us how they work and why they've been built in the way that they have. The final talk module is on managing flood incidents. And this is really something that we put together in response to what stakeholders and employers were interested in students having the skills or the skills that they want the students to learn on this program. The response that we make to flood events isn't just about building the walls to stop them. It really is about how we respond when they actually happen, because ultimately they can't be prevented. And people involved in flood risk management are going to be there on the ground. There's a lot of people, both in local authorities, in environment agencies, in consultancy companies, that have to be there to help when floods actually happen. And this module is all about understanding and responding to flood events so that we can minimize their impact. How do we actually manage the people and the responses to flood waters when they happen? What do we need to do? How do we help people? What services do we need to engage? There's lots of questions that need to be addressed, and that's what this module will look at. Then finally, in the third trimester, everybody doing the program would do a dissertation project specifically focused on flood risk management. And this is really the opportunity for every student to focus on what they're really interested in. So you can take the topic, whether that might be natural flood risk management, or looking at how communities engage with flood resilience programs, whatever it might be. You can look at it from many different approaches, but you can choose to specialize in that particular topic that you're interested in. And also the dissertation project will give you an opportunity to develop not only a deeper understanding of a particular flood risk management issue, but also the opportunity to build links with future employers. And wherever possible, we'll link projects with the demands of future employers. So, for example, there's maybe problems or issues that local authorities or their environment agency want to look at, and as far as we can, we will tie these up with dissertation projects so that students can build up these links with their future employers. So I'm just going to sort of finish off talking about the program, to talk about the steps that we've taken to try and ensure that the program is as flexible and as inclusive as possible. So throughout the whole program, it's been designed with this in mind, that students are able to study individual modules, that students are able to study part-time, because we realize some people might do this as some sort of, whilst there's still employment elsewhere. So you'll be able to study part-time over 2, 3 or 4 years. Also to be as inclusive as possible, there won't be any exams. It's all based on coursework. So that's things like writing reports, etc. And also there'll be elements of group work, which are key to improving your employability and identifying how you would work in a team, because flood risk management involves lots of people working together to solve the problems. So we're going to sort of build that in from the ground up. Just to give you a couple of examples of what it would look like if you were studying part-time. If you do the program over 2 years, in the first year you would study 4 of the modules in the first 2 trimesters. So you would do 80 credits of taught material. Then in the second year, you'd pick up another 40 credits of taught material before going on to do your dissertation project. So that's sort of what it would look like over 2 years. You could also do the program over 3 years, but I'm not going to put too many slides up here. So I'll just skip to what it looks like over a 4-year period. Here, if you do it over 4 years, you would do 40 credits in each year. So that's 1 module each trimester. And we've shown sort of how you would build up those modules over the 3 years. And then in the 4th year, you would do your dissertation project. So we've really designed this sort of from the ground up to be as flexible as possible, so that you can study it in as many ways as suits you, essentially. So just a final couple of things to point out, that the Flood Risk Management Master's Programme is being led by the Energy Environment Institute. So you'll be joining a dynamic and expanding new institute, which has got a strong research focus to it, which you'll have seen from the students speaking at the beginning, and all of us that are involved with the Energy Environment Institute. And you'll really benefit from that thriving research community, with over 50 researchers and PhD students involved directly in research in the energy and environment area. Just a couple of things about how you'll learn as well, just to sort of preempt perhaps some of the questions that people might have. The teaching is going to be a mixture of lectures, workshops and seminars. There might be some questions about sort of the response to COVID-19, and we can talk about that in the questions, but of course we'll adapt and cope with the situation that and any rules and regulations that we have, so that we deliver that teaching online where necessary, or adapt how we're doing the workshops to meet any regulations that there are. There'll be field work in many of the modules, so that you'll actually learn from seeing flood resilience in action, see actually what the practical measures are that have been taken to reduce flood risk. Again, we'll adapt those field work situations to deal with. We can either sort of do that online if necessary through a sort of virtual fieldwork experience, or we'll delay it and move it in the program to times when we're able to do it. We'll have a series of guest lectures from sector professionals, and obviously that's something that we can also tune into being online. And there'll be practical teaching to learn hands-on skills, and again we'll adapt to how we deliver that. Finally, it's important to say that we'll also have tutorials to support people individually and in small groups, so you'll learn in lots of different ways through this program. So that's all of what I was presenting to you today. Hopefully that's given you a flavour of what the whole program is about and how we're going to deliver it. We're now going to have a question and answer session with myself, Anne and Josh and Tom, all here to answer the questions, and Tom's going to sort of lead us in that. So hopefully people can show their videos now. If Anne and Josh want to come in there, that's great. So any questions anyone has, if you want to use the question tool on the toolbar at the right, we'll pick those up and Tom will feed them into us and we can try to answer them for you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for that. Got some good questions come in. So first one, which is probably for Josh and Anne, which is what's the postgraduate community like within the EEI, the Energy and Environment Institute, and at Hull?
Yeah, it's very active. Actually, there's a lot of people who meet for coffee regularly. There's a regular coffee Zoom meeting at the moment where people can ring in. Everybody's willing to help with everybody else's projects. There's regular trips to the pub and events on, like away days. People are always willing to help with fieldwork so they can get out of the office for a bit, which is great because I do a lot of it and need a lot of help. Anne, do you want to add anything?
Oh.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's a very tight community, also between the PhDs and the postdocs and the rest of the staff. Everyone is always available to help. Also, and not only in the social aspect, but also practicing presentations, technical questions, stuff like that. So I think it's a very open community.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Okay, so question I can partly answer, and Stuart might be able to help towards the end, is what is the closing date for applications? Maybe Stuart can come to that in a minute. And also, will it be quite maths based with regards to equations for measuring and modelling rivers? Okay, well, I'll answer the second part first. So I'm involved in teaching a module on this, or leading module on this, on modelling river systems. And it's very much something we teach from a non-maths equation-y based point. If you are maths literate, if you are very programming literate, that's great. We can develop those things. But we want people who are not experts or don't have background knowledge in those things to be able to learn how to both do some numerical modelling and, importantly, understand the strengths and weaknesses of the very different approaches that are available for it. And I think that's the approach we're taking throughout the Masters, isn't it, Stuart?
Yeah, no, very definitely. Yeah, you'll see on the entry requirements that we're encouraging applicants from all disciplines, because it's really important that to realise that future flood risk management requires a whole range of different approaches to solve the problems. It's not just an engineering approach. There are many different things that we need to look at and consider. And just quickly on the when's the sort of closing date for any applications, you can apply right up to the beginning of September. Obviously, if we fill all the places that we have in the course, it may fill up, but there's no closing date until the program starts.
That brings us on to another question that's come in, Stuart, very nicely, is how many people do you anticipate on the course?
We're expecting about 25 people on the course, but again, that is subject to the number of people that apply, and we have some flexibility over that. for a master's course like this, we'd expect around about 25.
Okay, so another question which I'll probably start to answer, but hello, I was wondering if there's any information on whether this course is likely to start normally in September, or whether COVID, the coronavirus, will mean it will all be online. So to sort of answer that, the plans are for the university to open in September, but teaching will be with a blended learning approach. That means a mixture of online courses and, where possible, some that will be in person. Obviously, we don't know what the situation will be like in September, how relaxed the rules we have at the moment will be, or even if they might be tighter. So it's probable at the beginning of the academic year, a lot of the tuition will be online, and hopefully we can move to having smaller groups and small group teaching within that as the course progresses, of course with appropriate social distancing in place. Anyone else to add anything to that, Stuart?
Yeah, I think you know, we'll use all the opportunities that are available to us. That there's not going to be one size fits all for how we have to deal with things from September onwards. So where it's appropriate and where it works, we can use online teaching and blended teaching approaches. But there's also potentially opportunities that we can still have small group teaching for laboratory classes. Obviously, there are different issues for working outside. That's maybe more accessible in certain circumstances. So some of the field work may be easier for us to arrange, etc. It's obviously a live situation at the moment, but we will adapt to it and provide the best experience that we can.
So I mean, myself and Stuart have been teaching online for the last 2 months since obviously the lockdown occurred in the UK, and that's we're now quite experienced in modifying our teaching for that approach, even involving virtual field courses, virtual practical classes where we carry out practicals ourselves with a video going to students. Okay. So another question here, which hopefully Stuart can answer, is if I started doing the course full time, would I be able to change to part time at a later date? Stuart?
It's an intriguing one. Yes, I would think so. There are, the way we've designed the program is to make it as flexible as possible. Although how you pay fees, etc., it's not, that wouldn't be something that we can directly answer. So if you at this point in time, I couldn't directly answer exactly how that would work. However, the course has been designed that certainly you could change between being full-time to part-time, but there'd have to be some exploration of how fees worked in that case, in all honesty, because that's a little bit more complicated. But we are including right from the beginning the opportunity that you can effectively study module by module. So you'll see advertised on the website that you can effectively do individual modules one at a time. So there are ways around that if you're expecting you want to change from full-time to part-time mode. And that's something we've discussed with you individually, I think.
Okay, great. Got a question is, are there any scholarships available for international students? And the answer is yes, and I'm just sending a response to that now with a link for that. There are also scholarships and bursaries available for other students. So there is the Vice Chancellor's Circle Scholarship, where there will be 6 students will receive a bursary worth up to £5,000 each, and that's for 6 students in both the MSc in Renewable Energy and the MSc in Flood Risk Management. So conceivably that's somewhere between 2 and 4 people in this Masters will get that. And furthermore, any existing graduates from the University of Hull receive £1,000 off the fees. Okay. There is one further question on that related. Maybe Stuart, you could answer that. Is sorry, another question. Is there potential for reduced fees if there are restrictions to face-to-face learning due to CV-19?
The normal policy is not to change fees because the same amount of teaching is involved whether it's online or face-to-face, you'll still get exactly the same support from us as academic staff, and you'll still have exactly the same engagement with us, perhaps in different circumstances, but as we've already outlined, we'll adapt things as much as we're able to, so there isn't any change in fees dependent on the way the course is delivered now.
Okay, so I've got a couple of technical questions here I'm going to read out and say we'll get back to on these, which is what are the required documents to be submitted for applying to the programme? Okay, and we'll email you back about those. And when is the closing date for the scholarships, and when will people hear if they've been successful? We have that information. They just
I can answer the scholarship.
Okay.
I can answer the certainly for the VCC scholarships, so the £5,000 scholarships that we have available. The closing date will be the end of July, and we will inform students as soon as we're able to. Obviously, it will depend on the number of applicants that we have, but it will certainly be before the end of August, I would expect. Okay.
How many hours per week on the full-time course, stroke part-time course? So I imagine full-time. What's the contact hours for a full-time, Stuart?
So I guess in full-time, you're looking at, I mean, it will vary week to week potentially, because some weeks you may have practicals or field work involved, so it's not going to be a constant amount, although we will try to organise teaching to be on set days, to be as flexible as possible for people, because we know some people will have part-time jobs, etc. But I would expect approximately 15 hours or so, sort of direct contact hours if you were doing it full-time, and obviously some fraction of that if you were part-time. So about 4 hours per module. But that, as I say, that is an approximation, because obviously if we do, if there's a field trip out, we'll organise those as whole day events. So that would be sort of 7 or 8 hours just on the field trip, and that might be alongside having supporting lectures or workshops that go with that.
Yep. Okay, that's a great answer. It's also just worth reiterating there that from a teaching perspective, master teaching is often more small group based, which means it's a lot more flexible. You have the ability to organise groups around when the class is available, when the students on the class are available, rather than when the lecturer is, to a degree. And it's a really nice, from my perspective, it's a really nice way of teaching and working with students. Just look at my questions. What are the links to industry from the course? And with staff, what practical consultancy or partner experience do the lecturers have? Do you want me to start?
Well, or? Yeah, I mean, I just start that the whole programme has been designed, from the ground up with cooperation from the Environment Agency and from local authorities, particularly Hull City Council, but also engineering consultancies like JVA, and have been involved with talking to us about what sort of skills they need students to have. So right from the beginning, this is a course which is industry facing and designed with the help of industry. And we've had almost inundated with offers, particularly from members of staff in the Environment Agency who want to be involved, want the opportunity to deliver, and also from the local authority. Some of the leads in the planning department want to be able to come in and talk to students on this course and give them their perspective on how they see the issues in flood risk management. So I think the whole programme is heavily embedded in the industry and in where you will be employed afterwards.
Okay, yeah, and to sort of follow that up, I've got extensive experience of working with the Environment Agency, Natural Resource Wales, SEPA, other environmental agencies and consultancies around the world. So I think the staff involved in this module have a widespread experience of working with and in industry. Certainly Rob Thomas, who's involved in the module, has as well. Chris Skinner has is working at the moment widely with people with businesses and industries around the whole region. So we have a lot of experience of working with stakeholders and the people who have helped shape this masters have said to us what we want people to be involved in. So a couple of tricky question here. A new declaration of the UK government is that any new students coming to the UK universities need to home quarantine for 14 days. So how will university and EEI members support new students to adapt to the new environment? That's a very good question.
Again, I think, foremost, we'd be looking to give people online support in that situation. Hopefully you'll be able to arrive before the teaching period started, so you could you'll be able to sort of attend any in-person events that we're able to do at that time. Again, it's something, we're all in a sort of, this is a live situation that we don't have every answer to of what things will be like in September, but we will be there to help and support you in every way that we can.
Further to that, I understand, just had an answer from one of the other panelists on this by messaging, saying that estates or the people who are in charge of the housing on campus are looking into this and looking to come up with some scheme to accommodate people on campus who have to self-quarantine before starting courses, so you can have access to the university facilities when you're there. Quite good question here is, if I apply, is there any chance I won't be successful? And with regards to this, should I get accommodation sorted now or should I wait? So sort of thinking through that question, when is the closing, when will people find out if they have been accepted on the Masters, is probably the way of cutting through that.
Certainly, you'll probably all realise that you can't quite apply for this course yet. So the link button for apply now is not yet live, and it will be in the next few weeks. We just have to wait for the final validation. Once you've applied, obviously if you meet the entry requirements, then we'd be very pleased and happy to offer you a place, and we would get that back to you as soon as we possibly could. And in terms of application, sorry if it wasn't clear before, you can apply essentially up until when the course starts, so right through to September. The only limit on that would be if we'd already filled up the number of places that we have on the course. We'll be as adaptable as we can to that. We're expecting about 25, but we have some flexibility over that number.
So I'd anticipate you'll find out quite soon. Please get back to me on the questions if that hasn't answered your question well enough. Thank you. This is a good question. Is the course looking to become accredited by CIWEM, the civil engineering body or institute? I believe that's something we have looked into, isn't it, Stuart, and are pursuing?
Yes, we would be, again, because we have to wait until the program has been fully validated before we can do that. Once that's happened, then we will be looking at that process. So obviously I can't answer that now, definitely, but certainly we will be applying.
Okay. Quick question here. I have already received a master's degree, an MSc. Am I eligible to apply for a second MSc? I believe it's quite possible for some people to have more than one MSc.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The only implication could sometimes be funding, your sources of funding, as to how people will support that, but there's certainly no barrier to doing a second MSc now.
Sure. Okay. What's the prospect of getting into a PhD or for doing further research within the EEI, within the Energy and Environment Institute, after completing this course?
Well, that's a direct route that we're expecting some of the graduates from the course to go through. So, I mean, there is clearly an employer focus, but without doubt, there's the opportunities to do more flood risk research in the future. So the course is also equipping you to do that, essentially.
Okay. A question for Josh and Anne, our younger researchers here, not us older ones. What's it like living in Hull as a young postgraduate or young early career researcher?
Yeah. So I start, Josh. I really like it because there are a lot of students, younger researchers that live here as well. The city center is really nice. There are a lot of nice areas to go for to a restaurant or to a pub. Yeah, because I'm an international myself, I really like how easy it is to get in touch with other internationals. Yeah, do things like sports, etc. So,
yeah. So there's a large number of PhD students within the institute, aren't there now? So over 50, yes. I think.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, and also postdocs. Yeah.
But I don't live in Hull. I live in York and now Leeds. So it's really easy to commute to if you can't live in Hull, because my partner goes to the university, Sheffield Hallam University. So I was commuting in with another postdoctoral researcher. So people are friendly. People live in York and Leeds, and I think somebody lives in Sheffield as well. So if you can't live in Hull for whatever reason, it's still quite easy to get to.
Okay, great. Thanks, Josh. I've got a question here about the Flood Innovation Centre, which is known as FLIC. It says, I saw about your Flood Innovation Centre on your website. Is this involved in the course? Stuart?
Yeah, again, I think that's one of the potential opportunities for dissertation projects, particularly. The Flood Innovation Centre is there to build links between industry and research experience at the University of Hull. So we would hope that we'll be able to work both with getting some of the expertise that's being looked that the Flood Innovation Centre has to bring that into the programme, but also potentially it'd be a route for finding dissertation projects where there's maybe some more involved research that companies were looking for. Those links might come through FLIC. So again, it's another opportunity to gain industrial experience and help you on your career path.
Yeah, I mean we have I think there's 9 people at FLIC working on flood innovation. That's sort of tools, products, services are all used to address flooding, and they're working with hundreds of small, medium enterprises, companies within the region. So there's lots of scope for going down that route as well. Okay. Oh, here's a good question. Question to Josh and Anne. Is there any local website / social media page to look for private accommodation and book online before I arrive? So I'm making plans.
Yeah, there are several good websites. I can send them if people are interested. But so when I moved here, I started looking for accommodations, I think like the week before, and when I arrived, I could move in an apartment within a couple of days. So I think I really like that. That it's relatively easy to find something. So there are websites for if you want to share a room. There are websites for if you want to have a studio of your own or your own apartment. So I think there are many good websites.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anne.
Sorry, can I just clarify a couple of? Oh, sorry. Was there? Sorry, I come in too early. There was just a couple of points I was going to clarify. Just for international applications, just bear in mind in terms of sort of the closing date for applications, you would also have to be thinking about your any visa applications that you might have to make. So just to bear in mind, if you're an international applicant, that would also factor into the deadline really for when you have to apply, and that's different for different types of visa applications. So you would need to be aware of that in terms of closing dates. You need to apply long enough in advance that you could get your visa approved, etc. And then there was also a question about the English language tests and qualifications. So just to clarify, again, that it's on the web. Details are given on the website for what you need to have. But the simple answer is that the course requires an academic IELTS of 6.0 overall, with no less than 5.5 in each of the skills. So yes, you do require evidence of English language skills, 6 overall for IELTS, with no less than 5.5 in each skill.
Great, thanks, Stuart. I think we have no more questions. No? Great, thank you. Thanks for all your questions. There's some really good questions, actually. I mean, we had one or two we wanted to sort of things we wanted to flesh out in questions, and they've all come up from the audience here, from you guys. So thanks very much for that.
Yeah.
Back to you, Stuart.
I think it's, yeah, I was just going to say, just so there's a summary slide up there just to remind people about some of the key things that we've talked about in the presentation. But I think the key thing there to say is that if you've got any more questions or there's anything else you want to know about the programme, then please email the ei@hull.ac.uk and we'll get back to you with an answer as soon as we're able to. So any questions, just email us and we'll help you as far as we can. I think it just leaves it for me to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for all of the panelists, for Josh and Anne, and for Tom for helping host the questions and keeping me vaguely on track. And thank you very much for everybody joining us. We hope that you'll come and study with us in September.
Thank you. Thanks, Stuart. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.